In March 1990 in Ozark, Alabama, a 22-year-old woman disappeared without warning, leaving behind a young daughter and a deeply concerned community. Tracy Harris, young, shy, and deeply loved, vanished without a word. For someone as dependable and consistent as Tracy, disappearing into thin air was far from normal. There was no note, no packed bags, no hint of intent. Her absence sent ripples through the small southern town and launched a mystery that would take decades to unravel. Tracy had last been seen on the 7th of March, 1990. She was still living in the same house with her ex-husband Carl Harris and their young daughter, Carolyn. Though the romantic bond between Tracy and Carl had dissolved, their shared responsibilities had kept them living under the same roof. A decision that may have stemmed from limited financial options or maternal concern for her child. But those close to her knew the situation was fraught. The home was a pressure cooker, simmering with unresolved tension, whispered stories of violence, and escalating danger. Carl Harris was the one who reported Tracy missing, launching a formal police investigation. As the authorities pieced together the final hours she was seen alive, suspicion began to form a shape. Carl and Tracy's history wasn't unknown. There had been arguments. There had been fear. Though no formal abuse reports existed on paper, those who had stayed in the house during that time, like Dawn Beasley and her fiancé, painted a troubling picture. The household, they said, was filled with tension. Carl had a temper, and more than once, they'd witnessed his anger flare toward Tracy. On the 14th of March, a week after Tracy's disappearance, the search came to a tragic end. Her body was found in the Choctawhatchee River in Dale County. It was a devastating moment for her family and the town that had held on to hope. The autopsy revealed a chilling truth. Tracy had both water and sand in her lungs, confirming she drowned. But bruises and deep markings around her neck suggested she had been strangled. There was more. She was found naked from the waist up, her clothes recovered at a separate location. Though the discovery raised the possibility of sexual assault, forensic evidence couldn't confirm it. The investigation shifted into high gear, and it didn't take long for the police to zero in on Carl Harris. He had motive. He had opportunity. More than a dozen individuals came forward, some testifying to Carl's violent behavior toward Tracy. And as the last person known to see her alive, he sat in the center of suspicion. Further scrutiny revealed that Carl had been involved with another woman during the time he still lived with Tracy. The affair, some speculated, could have served as fuel for eliminating an obstacle. Still, despite the testimonies and circumstantial clues, there was a missing piece. No physical evidence tied Carl to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing conclusive. So the case stalled. Cold. Tracy Harris was buried, but the questions surrounding her death were not. For more than 2 decades, the case remained open in name only. It lingered in the minds of family members, quietly archived among dozens of unsolved files in Ozark's police department. But everything changed in 2015, when the department formed a cold case unit aimed at re-examining long-dormant crimes. Tracy's name resurfaced, and this time, investigators approached her case with new eyes and a renewed sense of urgency. They reviewed old interviews. They followed the paper trail that had long been forgotten. They spoke to witnesses who hadn't been contacted in years. In September 2016, Carl Harris was arrested for the murder of his ex-wife. After 26 years of freedom, he found himself behind bars, accused of the very crime that had haunted him since 1990. The prosecution built its case carefully, relying on the long history of abuse claims and the absence of any other credible suspects. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough to bring Carl to trial. His world shrank once again to the 4 corners of a courtroom. The weight of nearly 3 decades rested on his shoulders. But just before the trial was set to begin, something extraordinary happened. Dawn Beasley, the woman who had once stayed with the Harris family and witnessed the tension firsthand, came forward with a revelation that no one saw coming. She told prosecutors she couldn't testify, not because she didn't remember, but because the story everyone believed was wrong. Dawn revealed a secret she had carried in silence for 30 years. According to Dawn, shortly after Tracy's death in 1990, a man named Jeffrey Beasley, her then husband, confessed to her that he had killed Tracy. He didn't whisper it under duress or during a fight. He told her plainly, admitting he strangled Tracy and disposed of her body in the river. He said it was an accident, that he panicked, that he feared no one would believe the truth. Dawn kept quiet, out of fear, out of shame, and perhaps out of the misguided belief that the truth would never come back to demand its due. But when Carl Harris was arrested, when she saw an innocent man preparing to go on trial for a murder he didn't commit, Dawn knew she had to speak. Her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent anymore. Her statement flipped the case on its head. The prosecution, faced with a direct confession and the recanting of a star witness, had no choice. Charges against Carl Harris were dropped. He walked free just as the trial was set to begin. Carolyn Harris was just 4 years old when her mother was taken from her. For most of her life, she believed her father was responsible. "I knew my mom's life was ended," she later said. "And then as the years went on, I found out that it had to do with my dad. She had no memories of her mother, only stories passed down from family, tales of a sweet and shy young woman who loved deeply and smiled often." Carl's exoneration left Carolyn wrestling with a lifetime of misunderstood pain. The man she had believed capable of murder was now free, and the man who truly took her mother away was finally in the crosshairs of justice. In January 2020, Jeffrey Beasley, then 54 years old, was arrested and formally charged with Tracy's murder. He pleaded guilty. The courtroom, filled with echoes from the past, heard the final admission. Beasley was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The confession closed the case, but it did not undo the damage. For 3 decades, Carl Harris had lived under a cloud of suspicion. Tracy's family had mourned without clarity, and a daughter had grown up believing a lie. The justice system had almost failed them all, until one woman's voice cracked the silence that had swallowed the truth. The Tracy Harris case is more than a cold case solved. It's a story of trauma buried and finally unearthed. It's about how secrets, no matter how long they hide, never stay buried forever. It's about fear, courage, and the high cost of silence. For Tracy, justice came late. For Carl, redemption came in the final hour. And for Carolyn, the truth, however painful, finally surfaced. In 1983, Laura Newman was just 18 years old. She had recently moved out of her parents' home in Baltimore, full of hope, ready to start college and begin building a life of her own. But all of that changed in an instant on the night of the 14th of October. She had fallen asleep watching television, assuming any sounds she heard in the apartment were her roommate returning home. What she didn't expect was the moment she was jolted awake, face smothered by a pillow, a gun pressed against her head. A man had climbed through her roommate's window and into her bedroom. There, in the bed she thought of as her safest space, he forcibly assaulted her. Laura never saw his face. Frozen with fear, she didn't fight back. "It was fear. It was shock," she would later say. "I really thought I might lose my life." Looking back, she sometimes wished she had resisted. "If I could change one thing, I would have fought. But in fact, I did not." That night would fracture the foundation of her life, altering everything. Her trauma didn't end with the assault. When she reported the attack to police, Laura quickly realized something was wrong. The detectives didn't believe her. They seemed to suspect she had known her attacker and was only framing it as an assault after the fact. Even her own family was divided, believing something had happened, but thinking it might have involved someone she knew. Laura insisted it was a stranger, and she never wavered. She lived under siege, never alone again, always behind locked doors, security systems, and roommates. Years passed. The case went cold. Her evidence kit was never processed. And still, she waited, always haunted, always watching. Being assaulted is a life sentence, she would later explain. It is something that is always vivid in your mind. 19 years later, in 2002, a news report changed everything. Baltimore police were finally opening thousands of untested assault kits, over 4,000 of them stored and forgotten. Laura, determined, called immediately. "I'm not kidding. I'm going to call you every day," she told the department. Eventually, she was connected to Detective Bernie Holthouse from the Cold Case Unit. One of the first questions I asked her, Holthouse recalled, was what she was wearing. Laura didn't hesitate. She remembered instantly. Her memory hadn't faded. Then came a harder question. How had the assault shaped her life? Laura answered with a devastating honesty. She wasn't married. She had no children. Trusting people, letting them in, those were things she'd never relearned. I really feel like I need to have this solved, she said. Holthouse listened, and more importantly, he believed her. But hope nearly shattered when they found her original assault kit had vanished from evidence control. It was gone. No DNA, no clear path forward. Still, the detectives didn't give up. They turned to fingerprints, and within an hour of submitting a recovered print from Laura's apartment, they had a match. His name was Alfonso Hill. A career criminal with arrests dating back to 1975, Hill was in a psychology class when detectives tracked him down. He claimed he had been trying to turn his life around. When they showed him Polaroids of Laura, told him what he had done to her, he was quiet. Then he began to talk. He described the assault in detail, random and unplanned. I just needed money. I was kind of drugged up, he said. It was all just random. He said guilt had consumed him for years. I was tired. I was ready to get it over with. 5 days later, after nearly 2 decades of silence, Laura's case was solved. Her attacker was behind bars. She said she felt vindicated, free, alive. But something continued to haunt her. Why hadn't this happened sooner? The fingerprint database had been running since 1991. Hill's prints were in it. The system could have matched him a decade earlier. Laura's anger was understandable. My feelings about the police department are that they really mishandled me as an assault victim, she said. The apology from her mother, who admitted she hadn't believed her because the police hadn't, was bittersweet. In court in September 2003, Laura finally saw Hill face to face. She glared at him as he pled guilty. Hill said, I was just hoping she was able to feel that I was sincerely sorry for what I had done. Laura told him plainly, I've lived 19 years of hell. I have lived in fear. Then she thanked him for owning up to it. I hope I can eventually get to the point of forgiveness, she said. Hill was sentenced to 20 years in prison. 5 years were suspended. He would serve at least 15. Laura, meanwhile, moved forward. She got engaged, rebuilt family ties. I think I am doing great, she said. I feel grateful for the outcome. But she wasn't done. Laura launched a foundation to advocate for cold case survivors and campaign for the re-examination of the estimated 500,000 untested assault kits sitting in evidence rooms nationwide. It is happening every day all around us to people we know, she said. And until we start to talk about it, it will not change. As more cases came to light, Hill was charged again in 2007, this time for assaults on 6 more women, committed between 1978 and 1989. Baltimore County Police believe he may be linked to 20 other unsolved attacks, all within a stretch of Loch Raven Boulevard. The victims, aged 22 to 33, were assaulted with weapons. Some were kidnapped. Others were attacked in their homes. When detectives tested the old evidence, microscope slides preserved by forensic pathologist Dr. Rudiger Breitnecker, they found Hill's DNA. In 1980, Julianne Wood was assaulted near Goucher College. She never had a name for her attacker until 2021, when she received a call from a college friend. That friend had seen a news story. Hill had confessed to the 1983 murder of Alicia Carter, another Goucher student. Carter had been found fatally stabbed in a wooded area, the same area where Julianne was attacked in 1980 and where Martha Southworth was assaulted in 1979. Reading about Carter's case, Julianne said, "It is a lot to digest, but I always felt in my heart it was the same man." She called police, asking, could Hill be her attacker too? In May 2021, Hill confirmed it was likely. He confessed to a dozen assaults during an interview with detectives. Some details were fuzzy, but Julianne's case was one he acknowledged looked like his. She was later informed that her case was being closed due to Hill's admission. Martha's assault had already been tied to Hill through DNA evidence, and now the 3 women, Laura, Julianne, and Martha, were no longer just survivors. They were connected. Together, they formed a private support group. They called it Our Stories, Taking Our Power Back. They shared emails and late-night calls. They organized, they raised funds, and they fought for the testing of the remaining evidence saved by Dr. Breitnecker. Of the more than 2,200 kits saved, about 200 have now been tested. There is still much more to do. Hill, now in his 70s, will not be eligible for parole until 2047. He'll be 95. Baltimore County State's Attorney Scott Schellenberger said it's likely Hill will die in prison. Schellenberger had triggered the investigation by requesting old case files and forcing renewed attention on Hill's history. In exchange for confessions, Hill was granted testimonial immunity so the victims and their families could finally have closure. Laura, Julianne, and Martha now speak not just for themselves, but for the silent thousands. Their stories, once ignored, now echo with force, and they will not be forgotten. The Black Hills of South Dakota, known for their sweeping vistas and dense pine forests, carry a kind of solemn quiet that can either comfort or haunt. On the 31st of August, 2013, that silence was shattered when a photographer taking scenic shots near Mount Rushmore made a disturbing discovery just off Iron Mountain Road near mile marker 54 and the Pigtail Bridge. There, hidden in the brush, lay the badly decomposed body of a woman. Her name was Meshel Will. Meshel, 38, had come to South Dakota just months before, hoping to start a new chapter. Originally from Wisconsin, she had only lived in Custer for about 6 months. Those who knew her said she had a soft, trusting nature, a trait that made her warm but also vulnerable. She was last seen alive on the 24th of August, 2013, in Keystone, after checking into the Brookside Motel with her boyfriend, Richard Melvin Schmitz. 6 days later, her body was found dumped just north of town, abandoned in the trees like an afterthought. The investigation into Meshel's death began swiftly. Schmitz was quickly identified as a person of interest, but the case stalled due to a lack of solid evidence. Days turned into months, and months into years. The trail grew cold, and the whispers around her disappearance began to fade. But not everyone moved on. Nancy Herman, Meshel's close friend, refused to let the case die in silence. She became a one-woman movement for justice, plastering missing posters, raising reward money, and creating a Facebook page titled Help Find Meshel's Perpetrator, where she operated under the handle Granny Gunning to Get Justice. In 2017, the Rapid City Journal featured her in a story aptly headlined, Granny on a Mission to Solve Friend's Demise. "I want justice for Meshel," she said. And she meant it. Behind the scenes, law enforcement was still quietly working. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office, along with the Custer County Sheriff's Office and Rapid City Police Department, never stopped re-examining the case. Sheriff Kevin Tom later said, "We never gave up on the Meshel Will case. After 8 years of hard work, we are pleased to finally arrest the person we believe is responsible." On the 16th of July, 2021, nearly 8 years after Meshel's body was discovered, Schmitz, then 53, was arrested at his home near Hill City. The arrest was the result of years of interviews, forensic reviews, and unrelenting persistence. Finally, someone was being held accountable. The community hoped it would mark the beginning of long overdue justice. But the story was not yet finished. While Schmitz had always denied involvement, new details began to paint a different picture. Prosecutors revealed that he had admitted to being mentally abusive to Meshel and had a deeply troubling history of violence. In newly surfaced documents, other women described terrifying experiences. 2 claimed Schmitz had tried to end their lives. The case against him now seemed less about mystery and more about accountability. A grand jury indicted him. Prosecutors charged Schmitz with second-degree murder. They argued that what happened in Keystone wasn't a tragic accident or misunderstanding. It was the violent culmination of a pattern of abuse. For years, Meshel had lived under the shadow of emotional manipulation. In the final days of her life, she had likely endured something far worse. Yet in January 2023, Schmitz entered an Alford plea, not to murder, but to second-degree manslaughter. This legal maneuver allowed him to maintain his innocence while acknowledging that the evidence could likely result in a conviction. It was a compromise, a reluctant step toward closure. During sentencing in March 2024, both sides made their final pleas. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum 10-year sentence. They told the court that Schmitz was fortunate to even be offered a plea deal and that Meshel had not deserved to die as she had, abandoned on the side of a mountain road, her body left to rot under the trees. Schmitz's defense painted a different picture. They claimed there were inaccurate facts, argued that Schmitz had health issues that would have made it physically impossible for him to move a body, and even suggested that Meshel might have wandered off and died on her own. They argued that there was no conclusive proof that her life had been taken. But Judge Craig Feifel didn't buy it. In delivering the sentence, he was firm. Releasing Schmitz would be inappropriate, he said, citing the continued danger he posed to the community. The court handed down the full 10-year sentence, with credit for the roughly 2.5 years Schmitz had already spent in custody. It wasn't a life sentence. It wasn't even a murder conviction. But it was something. It was a moment of accountability in a case that had gone unanswered for far too long. Roxanne Hammond, the senior deputy for the Pennington County State's Attorney's Office, said it plainly, "I'm happy to have a resolution to this case after over a decade." For those who knew and loved Meshel Will, the grief remains. No sentence can undo the years of silence. No courtroom ruling can erase the image of a woman's life discarded in the forest. But thanks to the tenacity of a friend and the determination of law enforcement, Meshel's story won't end in a cold file or a nameless grave. Her name is remembered. Her life mattered. And finally, after 8 years of evasion and almost 2 more of court delays, justice found its way through the pines.